Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating and admittedly provocative ideological blueprint. We're going to dive right into the details of one specific framework that critiques state power, collectivism, and modern political movements. Whether you agree with the conclusions or not, the way this argument is meticulously built from the ground up is absolutely compelling to examine. We're going to look closely at how this framework defines the very concept of liberty and how it applies that definition to critique some of today's most debated political alliances. So let's just jump right in with a quote that instantly establishes the stakes here. The source material states, "I don't want a government promising to give me everything while gradually taking away my ability to decide what to do with my own life." Right off the bat, we're dropped into the absolute center of a historic tension. It's not just a casual preference. The author frames this as a profound friction between the comforting promise of total state security and the fundamental right to personal autonomy. This worldview is deeply, deeply skeptical of that trade-off, and that really sets the stage for everything we're about to explore. Section 1. The Architecture of Liberty, Defining the State's Role. Now, the absolute foundation of this worldview is that deeply held personal convictions demand a society built entirely around individual freedom. But to be clear, this isn't advocating for total anarchy. The framework argues the state should absolutely provide reasonable, essential services. We're talking education, healthcare, and a baseline social safety net. Where the hard boundary is drawn, though, is that the state must never take away a person's property, their work, their ideas, or their ambitions. It's a delicate balancing act. This philosophy demands a state that supports its citizens, but absolutely refuses to let that state become the master of their lives. And demanding this high level of personal autonomy isn't framed here as an act of selfishness. Rather, it's viewed as the literal engine of human progress. It's the freedom to create your own project, to invest your resources, to invent, to take massive risks. And, maybe most importantly, the freedom to succeed or fail and then try again. That cycle of individual trial and error is seen as the essential heartbeat of human freedom itself. The core argument really hinges on the idea that without it, societal advancement fundamentally stalls out. Section 2. Rejecting Radical Collectivism, the Critique of Accumulated Power. Moving into the details, this framework outlines a deep, structural distrust of collectivist systems. And here are the exact mechanics of why the author believes this. Step 1. The state accumulates an enormous amount of political and economic power. Step 2, the public is assured this concentration of power is entirely for their own benefit, for the common good. But step 3 is the inevitable result, according to this philosophy. Individual liberty is gradually, but inevitably, lost. Collectivism just isn't seen as a viable or a safe remedy for the problems of capitalism, primarily because this blueprint absolutely refuses to trust any system that hoards that much power. Section 3. Defining Political Islam, Ideology versus Individuals. Now this is crucial. A massive, bright line is drawn here between political ideology and individual human beings. This framework firmly and explicitly states that Muslim citizens deserve the exact same citizenship, dignity, religious freedom, and equal protection under the law that anyone else would demand for themselves. There is zero compromise on individual human rights. However, it insists on examining political Islam strictly as a comprehensive, structural political ideology, completely separate from the individuals who practice the Islamic faith. The author argues that an ideology doesn't just magically become progressive because its representatives form convenient political alliances with left-wing movements. Furthermore, a movement isn't inherently progressive simply because it might belong to a minority or immigrant demographic, or because its leaders have learned to adopt the modern vocabulary of social justice. To understand true intent, this blueprint insists we really have to look deeper at the actual structural mechanics of the ideology, well beyond just the surface-level optics. Section 4. A structural resemblance, the unlikely alliance. So this brings us directly to what is arguably the most provocative assertion in the text. Why exactly would an alliance between the radical left and political Islam cause such concern for the author, rather than reassurance? By asking this question, we're essentially forced to look past those surface-level differences, past the totally different origins and rhetoric of these groups, and examine the underlying functional mechanics of both political movements in detail. Because despite having vastly different origins and stated objectives, if you look at the ultimate result for the individual, a pattern emerges. Under both authoritarian socialism and political Islam, the individual is increasingly subordinated to a collective ideological objective. Both rely on a massive concentration of power to force a collective vision onto society. Therefore, When these two distinct movements find common political ground, this framework sees a terrifying magnification of the erosion of individual liberty alongside a really dangerous concentration of state power. Section 5. A new vision of progress. The ultimate synthesis. And this brings us to the synthesis, where a clear alternative is defined to both the perceived failures of the political right and the structural dangers of collectivism on the left. True progress, in this view, requires a very pragmatic blueprint. It's not some sweeping, collective utopian dream. No, it requires strong, stable institutions. It demands absolute equal treatment under the law and necessitates essential protections for those who are vulnerable and truly need them. It strictly protects the freedom of conscience and religion, but above all else, it requires robust economic and personal liberty. Everything in this blueprint is designed to build a protective wall right around the individual. Ultimately, this entire ideological structure, every critique of the state, every rejection of socialism, every single warning about political Islam, is built to defend one core concept. And that is ensuring there is enough economic and personal liberty for individuals to build their own lives. The right to design, execute, and truly own your personal life project is, according to this perspective, the very definition of progress. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Based on the framework we've just unpacked in detail, how do modern societies successfully strike the right balance between pursuing necessary collective social goals and preserving the incredibly delicate architecture of individual liberty? It's a massive tension that defines almost every major political debate we have today. Thanks for joining me to explore the details of this source and keep asking the big questions.